So I heard a quote recently from a book called Meet Smarter. And it says the purpose of a board or a vestry for our purposes today is that they are responsible for paving the future for the organization, and it can only do so if it focuses on the issues that are waiting to happen or it wants to happen. So you focuses on the issues that are waiting to happen or that you want to happen. And if you think about that, if you put that in the framework of how you structure and think about your agenda, how does that change your agenda for your vestry meetings? I mean, we all know what it feels like to sit in those 2+ hour vestry meetings where you sit there and you're just, hashing it out, and somebody's talking about the tone or the color of the carpet on the floor. And I started in a small parish, and when I got there, they were in huge conflict about the shade of blue that they were going to paint the ceiling. Now, I mean, it's important, I understand, and all the historical reasons for that, but we had to sort of pull back from that and say, okay, so what are we talking about mission? What are we talking about the future? What are we talking about hope? And I started thinking about this, and it was actually at the Solomon Center. It was 6 years ago. I was here for a meeting. It's called the Gathering of Leaders, and this was the brainchild of Bishop Rev'd Canon of Texas. And his vision was to get together clergy predominantly under the age of 50, to get together, I call it a happy church conference. And it's just about idea sharing and best practices. And it was during this meeting, actually, that he did a presentation on vestry structure, about how to structure your vestry in a completely different way. And it was revolutionary for me. It was something I never really thought about, and John's going to talk about the details of that in just a minute. But it did pulls back from the minutiae that is important, but doesn't really vision. If I think about here at St. Paul's and what Father Courtney was talking about, certainly there were the things that had to get done. To get from the water line 8 feet up on the bricks, and your community decimated, and it was a mess. I mean, you had to get the church cleaned out. You had to get the work done, the rebuilding, and the contractors, and the builders, and all of those sorts of things. But the leadership had a vision for this congregation, that 100 of you would be sitting here today talking about vestry, and it's this beautiful space. So the difference between those two things is church work, which is important, has to get done, you have to pay the bills, you have to turn on the lights, and you have to figure out the color of the front door of the church is. But what takes you to that next place, that place that focuses on the things that are to happen, that's kingdom work. That's the thing of the gospel. That's the things that Jesus has called us to do as the leaders of the church. So the question I have for you is, you start to think about your vestry and how you're going to put together your agenda. How much of it is spent on church work, and how much of it is spent on kingdom work? So there are a couple of things about kingdom work that I think are really important. First is, it adds a spiritual component to your time together. And I'm not talking about just somebody, doing, prayer at the beginning and then just kind of going on. And that's important, but being deliberate about starting and ending your time together with your faith, with the things that undergird us as a community of faith. Stop and ask those questions. Where has God shown up in your day? Where has God shown up in the life of your congregation? Tell a story. So you do this how you wish. We, in my former parish, we would end each vestry meeting with somebody telling us a story. It may be someone from the vestry. It may be somebody who comes in who's been affected by the life of a congregation. They came in and they said to us, you know what, as you're turning on the lights, know that phone call that you made meant the difference between me not being a part of this congregation and me being a part of the life of this community. Or somebody reached out in kindness, or whatever it might be. But again, it refocuses you on okay, yeah, This is why we're doing what we're doing. When leadership is viewed, I think, through a spiritual lens, it changes everything. It changes how you treat each other. It changes how you do your work. The other thing I think that kingdom work does is it transforms the leadership of your church. Idle listeners on a vestry or on a vestry are not connected to the body. We all know what it feels like to be at a meeting and you sit there and you just have nothing to really say. You kind of zone in, zone out. You might be doing your grocery list and thinking about what's on tap for tomorrow, your kid's soccer game later that day. But this model that John's going to talk about includes every single person on the vestry. Every single person has a role. And you may wonder, okay, so you're in a small church, and I was in a small church for 3.5 years, and you say, they're 5 of us, and the same 5 of us do everything. Okay, so what does that mean? How else can you invite others to be then a part of life of the parish? The thing that happens is people like to be asked. They like to be asked. Please participate. The other thing I think is that isolated leadership is not sustainable. It's just not. I was talking to someone yesterday, wonderful, capable, smart, dedicated church member, and this person is completely burned out because she feels like alone. So what can you do within the model of your vestry for that not to happen, for someone not to feel like they're carrying the water all the time? It also strengthens the relationships between the laity and the clergy. It opens up conversation for the things that are hard, as well as the things that are good, the things to celebrate, the other times when you have to get out from behind yourself and speak the truth, and to do it in a way, but it's always easier to speak that truth when you've built that relationship with your clergy person. The other thing that this allows is that when transition happens, as it does, if your laity is well equipped and well trained and well focused and well involved, then certainly you miss the priest, but we come and go. And when you've really developed that your core of your laity, then they know, okay, well it's time, we can do this. We can pick up this ball and we can carry it until the next time comes. And I know so many of you have done that so well. I want to tell you a very quick story about a man in my former parish, and we had a stewardship dinner. And there's a lot of church work that goes into the stewardship dinner. You got to line up the speaker, you've got reservations to make, you've got food to prepare. Well, he decided that the best way to get participation for that stewardship dinner was to pick up the phone and start to call. And he called, and he called, and he called. And by the time the dinner rolled around, we had 325 people at that stewardship dinner. And I probably 10 of them, the different conversations came up to one of us on staff and said, I was kind of on the fringes of St. James, and I didn't really, I saw that stewardship dinner, and I didn't really know who was I going to sit with, but then Joe Myers called me up, and he made me feel so welcome, and so I'm here. And then they listened, and they thought, and they joined the church. That's kingdom work. Church work and kingdom work, hand in hand. The last thing I want to say is that it transforms your congregation. You're able to recruit new leadership. You're able to dream and to be and to think about things more than you can ask for or imagine. It opens up creativity. If you're just down in the mires and in the weeds, your mind is never able to be open to what's possible, how God can move, how the Spirit is present. So church work is maintenance, and kingdom work is mission. The difference between maintenance and mission. So John's going to tell you a little bit about how you can possibly structure your vestry meetings to model this, and he's going to say the same thing. Part of also why we're standing up here in front of you today is that you listen to this, you go to these other meetings, you get back, you try to figure out how that works in your congregation, and you don't really know, and you're struggling with it, and it takes time. This is not an overnight thing. We're here to help. We can come to a meeting, we can talk to you on the phone, whatever it is that you need to help make this happen.
So, as Canon Manning said so well, I think everyone in this room knows that the work of the vestry includes both church and kingdom work. It's both of those things. So here's the two questions that I want you to wrestle with me for the next 7 or 8 minutes. Number one is, how can we structure the vestry so that vestry members feel like they're doing kingdom work and not just church work? So how can we evolve that structure? And number two is, how can we structure the vestry so that leadership is shared by the entire vestry? Knowing that the healthiest churches and vestries, those churches and vestries that successfully engage in kingdom work, they will have buy-in from everyone. They will share in collaborative leadership, and they will also share in the work and life of the church. So here are 5 suggestions. Take them as that, they're suggestions, and they're not going to work in all of your churches, but I think they're food for thought that may help your vestry find more time for kingdom work and be able to share leadership a bit better between the clergy and the laity. Now, the first one, I'm going to paraphrase Canon Manning again, but it's worth repeating. And it may sound like a no-brainer, but it is so important to begin and end each vestry meeting with a spiritual component. I'm willing to bet that you all pray when we start a vestry meeting, maybe even pray at the end of it as well. But as she said, we're not just talking about prayer. We're talking about something more than that. Maybe you have one of your vestry members lead a devotion at the beginning of a meeting, and then you rotate through vestry members each month throughout the year so that everybody takes a month and takes a turn. Because here's the point, I'm going to reiterate this again. We need to ground ourselves in the spiritual dimension of what we are gathered to do. It sounds simple, but it can't be overstated. So maybe you take a moment and you have someone talk about where God is showing up in their life or in your community. Because as Canon Manning said, talking about God and your relationship to God can change everything about the dynamic of your vestry. The way you look at a meeting agenda, the way you look at a financial report, the way you look at the world, all of this can and will change when it's grounded in a deep-seated spirituality. Number 2, we've got to find ways to tighten up meetings so that we can limit the minutia. Minutia can be really important, but for all of you who have owned vestries and have served before, which I'm willing to bet you have, I think you know that minutia can absolutely weigh vestries down, and it can wear vestries out. Now, one way to do this is to adopt an item called a consent agenda. Have any of you all heard of a consent agenda before? A couple? Is there anyone whose vestry in here uses a consent agenda? All right, we're in uncharted territory, but that's a good thing. So a consent agenda is an item that contains everything that does not need to be discussed in detail. Everything that simply needs to be approved from the last meeting. For instance, this might include the last meeting's minutes, the treasurer's report from the last meeting, any resolutions that were approved at the last meeting. And the idea is that the clerk, who has to be really organized and on top of things in order to pull this off, but the clerk sends out this consent agenda a week or so early to all the vestry members. And you as vestry members spend time looking at it. And if you have any questions, if you have a question about the budget, you email or you call or you set up a meeting with the treasurer, and you get your question answered before the meeting ever begins. Now, what happens if the answer to your question is not what you want to hear? Well, you scratch it from the consent agenda and you visit it during the meetings. But I think we all know that vestries can so easily fall into this model of wasting time, quite frankly, on this minutia, on this church work and this business work. And when we do that, there's often little to no time left for anything else. So with the consent agenda, most of the church work, I say most, is taken care of and approved before your meeting ever even begins. That leaves you more time to focus on mission, evangelism, things that we really need to be spending time on as vestries. Number 3. So even though some of the items that just have to be approved are quickly taken care of with this consent agenda, there is still always going to be some important church work that you're going to need to engage in as a vestry. Now, one thing you may want to consider is dividing up responsibility for these matters among vestry members. For instance, maybe your vestry has 9 people. That seems to be a common number for vestries down here. So you divide that group of 9 people into 3 groups of 3. One can be dedicated to focusing on administration. One can be dedicated to focusing on property. One can focus on the education or mission opportunities of the church. You can call these groups whatever you want, and every church would probably call them something different. But just to reframe for a second, here's what this meeting looks like so far. You begin with this time of devotion. And then the approval part of the meeting that can take so long, that's already taken care of by this consent agenda. So then you divide up immediately into these 3 groups. And you take 20 or 30 minutes with these committees. And whether or not they have any business, it's an opportunity for the committees to get together and to reconnect, to talk about what it is that they need to present to the wider vestry, how they're going to organize a project, how they're going to pass resolution, etc. In this model, it's not just the rector or the senior warden in some cases who is steering the conversation or exerting leadership. Leadership for the entire life of the church is being split and shared among these committees. And this is important to reiterate something Canon Manning said again. Isolated leadership is not sustainable leadership. If we can all thump that into our heads a few times. It's not sustainable. The gospel is really clear about this. We're not to go at this alone. We're given each other in order to undertake this work together. So here's suggestion 4 that goes hand in hand with sharing leadership. You may want to think about not having your rector preside at vestry meetings. Does anyone's vestry currently do that? Has anyone ever heard of that? Okay. I see some fear in some clergy's eyes, and that's understandable. But here's the deal. The canons give the rector the authority to lead vestry meetings. But as Mark pointed out earlier, they also give the rector the authority to give that authority to someone else in order to lead the vestry meetings. And of course, this isn't going to be a fit everywhere. But how can this be advantageous? To begin with, it gives the rector extra flexibility. It allows the priest in charge of the rector to observe what's going on, to read body language, to read the room, to take the temperature. Can't be stated enough. It empowers the senior warden, and it creates a team of collaborative leadership between a member of the clergy and a member of the laity. And then, of course, leading up to meetings, it allows the rector, the priest in charge, to focus more on kingdom work, instead of spending so many hours trying to prepare for every upcoming vestry meeting. Now, this is going to go without saying, but this model requires the rector and the warden to absolutely be on the same page. And it requires a deep relationship between those two. Do any of you who might be wardens have weekly meetings with your rectors already? Standing meetings. I find that's the easiest thing to do. You say, Tuesdays at 10 o'clock, we're going to make an hour meeting together. And if we can't make it, because that's going to happen, we'll get together the next week. You're not always going to have business to discuss, but the important thing is that relationship grows deeper and the leadership is shared. So the idea behind these first 4 suggestions is that even when you have a huge decision to make, not just the color of a door or the color of carpet, but we have big decisions too, your meeting's still not going to take a long time because your committees are going to be working hard, divided up, and looking at the things they need to look at. And then there's this kind of unwritten rule that with whatever time is left over, we're going to focus on kingdom work. So, by canon and rubric, as Bishop Thompson mentioned earlier, the rector is responsible for the spiritual life of the congregation. Now, by canons and rubric, the vestry is empowered with preserving the well-being of church finances and church property. This restructuring, this model, allows the vestry and the rector to engage in both aspects of this work, the spiritual life and more practical things that we need to take care of, kingdom work and church work. Now, the last suggestion that I'm going to make is this. Find time at least once a year to get away with your vestry. Maybe a vestry retreat. You can invite spouses, but you're not going to talk solely about the day-to-day business of the church. This isn't the time to get bogged down in that. Maybe you want to talk about some big picture things, some re-envisioning of where you want to go. But this is mostly a time to form community and to build trust and to have fun. It's a word that we hadn't thrown out yet, but good leadership is going to incorporate elements of fun and enjoyment and community building. We all need to keep that in mind. So again, these are just suggestions to help us as vestry spend more time on kingdom work than church work, also to share more leadership between clergy and laity. And the reason that we share these suggestions right now is because there has to be a practical structure in place in order for us to engage in kingdom work. If our vestries and churches are a mess, we are never going to get to kingdom work. But if you have a good model in place, whatever it is, whatever works for your church, it just gets you where you need to go a bit faster. Canon Manning, anything to add to that?
The only thing that, I don't know if you can hear me, another thing about leadership, I love the bishop's list, so it's fantastic. Another thing I think about when John and I were talking about yesterday when we met was that good leadership is like leaven. You know that it's there. You certainly have to have it in order for the bread to rise, but you don't always see how it's part of the whole, that it's part of the body. That's when you have the idea that bubbles up from somebody who you least expect it to bubble up from. That happens because leadership's allowing that agent of change and transformation to feel, to infuse the system so that people feel like they have a voice. So I think that's another way to think about that. And we were talking